Good evening, everyone. My name is Omar Kudari. I'm a volunteer with the Cary Lecture Committee. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Before we begin, please note the nearest exit with the exit signs above the doors in case of an emergency. Also, kindly silence your cell phones. For those who may need them, restrooms are on the basement level, and there's an elevator in the front lobby to the left as you exit the auditorium. The Cary Lecture Series is made possible by the Isaac Harris Cary Fund, established through a generous bequest to the town of Lexington by two sisters, Susanna E. Cary and Eliza Cary Farnham. Their generous gift includes this very building, a scholarship fund for graduating seniors, and 4 public lectures each year to educate the community. We're grateful to many people who help make these lectures possible. Special thanks to the Cary Memorial Library, our co-sponsor, and its director and staff, especially Matt Schumann for his great publicity materials. Our gratitude also goes to the staff of Batten Auditorium, particularly Kyle Walsh and Vincent LaRoe, as well as Jonas Miller, Lexington's Director of Communications. Finally, thank you to LexMedia for recording tonight's lecture. I hope they're, yes, getting a wave up there, and sharing it on their website. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Professor Felix Warneken. Dr. Warneken earned his PhD from the University of Leipzig in Germany while working at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. Now a professor at the University of Michigan, his fascinating research focuses on cooperation and social cognitive development in children and great apes. There'll be a chance for questions afterwards. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Felix Warneken to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I think so. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation to this amazing venue, and thank you for coming here on a Saturday night. I'm going to share some insights from research that we've conducted to understand something about human nature by studying young children and also chimpanzees. But before we get to children, I wanted to consider something about us, about adults. So let's think about the situation where at the parking lot of your favorite grocery store, it's raining really hard, you see someone having an umbrella in one hand, keys in the other, having groceries somewhere under the arm, approaching their car, and suddenly dropping the keys on the ground. I hope that you would walk over and maybe pick up the keys, maybe even open the trunk to help your fellow shopper put their groceries into the car. Right? So this would be an example of an altruistic behavior where you put another person's need in front of your own, right? You could have just gone to your car and not care about them, but we have, I hope, some inclination to want to help others out. So this would be one inclination. Yeah? There's a request to use the microphone because the lapel sounds hollow. Oh, I see. Is this, and if I move it, is this better? No? Yeah, does it work? No? Is this better? Yes. Yeah? Okay, all right, we'll do that. I'll turn this one off then. Okay, is that okay? All right. Thank you for the helpful sharing of this microphone, so you can hear me. So with the a shopping example, that would be an act of helping, but we also engage in other kinds of altruistic behaviors where we pay a cost to benefit other individuals. So, for example, donating blood or donating money for other people that we might not even know. And so one big question is now what motivates these kinds of behaviors? And there are many different reasons why we do this. So this could be that we want to get a good reputation, right? That we help this shopper and we think then they will think positively about us and share this with other people, or that we've somehow learned to be a good citizen and so forth. So certainly these factors might play a role for us as adults. But the big question is this really everything? Is that the origin of our inclination to help others and cooperate with others, more broadly speaking? And so when you look at the question where this comes from, this now turns us to children, where it is to really understand where this comes from, you have to study children. And when you look at this common assumption about children and human development more generally, is that we start out as egoists, that we are initially selfishly motivated, that an infant or toddler really cares only about their own needs and would not be inclined to help others out. And then over time, they become cooperative, like that in addition to having selfish inclinations, also have cooperative inclinations to help someone out with their groceries or donate money and so forth. And what needs to happen for someone to turn from a pure egoist into someone who is also cooperative is that you need these external factors like social learning, that kids, for example, see others being helpful and nice to others and copy that behavior, or that they make kind of experiences that if they're not helpful to others, they're being excluded or people are not friendly to them, or that we internalize cultural norms about being a good citizen and being nice to others or be fair and so forth, right? So this is kind of a common sense understanding that you encounter a lot. And it is also a foundation in the behavioral sciences across many different fields, that this is kind of the state of nature, and you need teachings and you need culture for individuals to become cooperative, okay? So, but now let's put this to a test. Is this really true? So what I want to show you now is a series of experiments where we try to see to what extent kids might be helpful or only care about themselves. And so here is one example. So this is a split screen. You see me here on the smaller image. I'm standing on the right, hanging towels on the clothesline, and accidentally drop a clothespin on the floor. And this is happening while an 18-month-old, you see here in the center, is watching what I'm doing. So let's see what happens. So what we found is that these 18-month-old children, and actually also 14-month-olds, are willing to help in this kind of situation. So what we see is that in almost around 70% of cases, kids will pick up a clothespin and hand it back to me. But now we have to ask, like, why exactly do they do that? And so it could be that they want to be helpful, but it's also possible that they are OCD and think that clothespins don't belong on the floor. Maybe more realistically, it could be that they think, well, that was fun, do it again, and that's why they hand it to me, right? So that's why in these experiments we run with kids, we always try to compare different kinds of situations with each other. And so the situation you just saw is the experimental condition where my goal of hanging towels on the line and the outcome of a clothespin on the floor did not match. And so what we then did in the control condition is that I stand there and throw clothespins on the floor on purpose. So the clothespins on the floor were actually my goal. And so what you see here is that almost never would kids pick up the clothespin and return it to me. So it seems like it's not the case that they're OCD, and it's also not the case that they just think I should throw clothespins on the floor and want to reinitiate that action, okay? So this would be initial evidence maybe kids are actually helpful. But we wanted to probe how helpful they are. Can they do this in different kinds of situations? So here's another situation we created for them. So here you see a cabinet on the left, and so first I had put a stack of magazines into that cabinet and closed the door. And then I went to the other end of the room to get another stack of magazines, and then this happens. Oh. And again, we find that kids open the door in the experimental condition where the doors were an obstacle to my goal, but they don't open it in a control condition in which I first put the stack of magazines on top of the cabinet, then close the door, get another stack of magazines and bump into the doors, not because I have trouble putting it inside, but because I have trouble putting it on top. And as you see here, none of the children ever opened the doors in that situation. So that indicates to us that it's not the case that they are just reminded of how much fun it is to open doors, or that they're just drawn towards the doors in some unspecific way. No, it seems to me us that it has something to do with, in one case, the doors being a problem for me, and then they open it, and in the other case, it has nothing to do with my goal, and then they keep it closed. So one issue with these two examples is, however, that these are situations that kids could have encountered at home, right? So maybe it's possible that they've been rewarded or told what to do when someone drops something on the ground, and certainly they've encountered also that when they drop something, someone picks it up for them. So what can we do to see whether this is based on some prior experience versus they really make some novel inference about when help is needed and when it's not? So what we do in this line of work is that we create a situation that kids could not have ever encountered before. So what we did is we have this box here that has a hole on top and a flap on the side. And a different experimenter first showed the kids about the flap. So open the flap and they realize that then they can access things that are inside. And then later I come into the room with a cup of tea and a spoon, and then I stir the spoon and accidentally drop the spoon through the hole and can't get my spoon back.
Oh. Oh.
So what we find is that even this is a novel behavior where they just learned about the flap. They immediately use it in a helpful manner in the experimental condition you just saw, where the spoon in the box was a problem, but they don't do it when I throw the spoon through the hole on purpose. So it's not the case that they just want to do this action they just learned over and over again. It seems to be tied to my goal, and children are willing to be helpful. All right? So this shows that kids are willing and able to help in these kinds of situations. And as I mentioned, they do it, as you saw here, at 18 months. And some other studies we show that at least with situations like the clothespin task, already 14-month-olds are willing and able to help. One thing about these situations I showed you is that there was always a very over cue about my problem that I did, right? That I bump into the doors or is reaching for an object. But adults also help in situations where it's not quite as, where these cues are absent. So if, for example, someone's walking down the street and they accidentally, like their scarf falls out of the bag and lands on the ground, you might walk after them and say, hey, you lost your scarf, right? So that would be something where the person is completely oblivious, didn't even know that a problem happened, but as an adult, at least, we're able to infer that this is not something that the person could have wanted, and then engage in what I call proactive helping behaviors. So we wanted to see whether kids do this kind of behavior as well. So here's the situation we created. So this is, again, a toddler who is centered in the middle. So we have this zigzag ramp that play with. Two reasons for this. One is that it makes the helping a little bit more costly, but the other reason is that they're always located in one particular spot here. And there's, as you see, there's also no parent in the room. And on the right, you will see an experimenter who is picking up little milk cans from the table and puts them in a box. And what happened is that previously she had done this and dropped some on the ground and then picked them up and put them back in the box. But now what happens is that there's a milk can, oh, you can't see this with my pointer, on the white cloth table that is rolling off the table behind her back. So she doesn't even notice that this is happening.
In there. I'll put that one here. And then let's see, I've got this one. The big box, okay. Put that here. And then here's a small
And so what we find is that at least by 2 years of age, kids engage in this proactive helping behavior where the experimenter is not providing any cues whatsoever about the problem, but kids have to remember what she wanted from before and make an inference from the situation itself that this is something that requires intervention, okay? And so this again indicates to us that kids have a cognitive ability to infer the goals that others have and know when to help, and also have this motivation to help others out, even in a situation when there's no request and no demand from the person needing help. So while this shows certainly that kids are kind of clever helpers, maybe we want to know a little bit more what exactly motivates them. And so one possibility is that they kind of want to get some reward out of it, so that they think that they gain some benefit from this. But in these studies that we run, the experimenters never offers a reward and also never praises them. So we explain this with the parents beforehand, that we know that usually you would say thank you, but for scientific reasons, we are not very polite in the moment. And so we found that whether we reward kids for helping, that we offer them a toy every time they help, or not offer them a toy, has absolutely no effect in the immediate moment. But another question is, well, what is the effect of rewards for future helping behaviors? And so this is what I want to show you now, what we found there. So this is with 20-month-old children, and we have an initial learning phase where an experimenter is dropping stuff on the ground, similar to this clothespin task. And then one group of kids, so this is randomly assigned, are in a condition where they receive no reward for helping. So this is basically like in these previous studies, where we see until kids help 5 times, and they are just, their helping is not being rewarded. But then there is another group of kids that they learn that they get basically paid for helping. So every time the experimenter accidentally drops something on the ground, holds out a toy for them that they hand to them in exchange for picking up the drop object. And the critical test phase now is that whether you are a kid from group A or group B, now the same experimenter, again, is very clumsy, continues to drop stuff, but is now not offering any reward for anyone here, okay? And so what we found is that kids who had previously helped and not been rewarded continue to help at a high rate. But kids who had previously been rewarded and now don't get a reward are less likely to help. So what's going on here? So what we think is what's happening is an effect that's often called crowding out in economics, or over-justification effect in psychology, where the idea is that kids are originally intrinsically motivated to help, so they do it for the sake of helping, but now the kids who learn that there's this external reward they get, the helping becomes instrumental to receive this extrinsic reward. And so now for the kids in the reward condition, their initially intrinsic motivation is undermined by this external reward, and now if no reward is forthcoming, they see no point in helping, okay? So what we conclude from this is that for these young kids, first of all, these external rewards are not necessary, and on top of that, they might actually undermine kids' helping behaviors for the future. The flip side of benefits are the costs. So this is also an important component of altruistic behavior. To what extent are you willing to pay a cost to help? And so what we try to see is to what extent kids really put some effort into helping. And in the examples I showed you, it could be that it's kind of boring to just hang out with mom in the corner of the room, and so maybe they help in order to keep themselves busy or something like that. And so to test this, what we did now is we engaged them in a really fun activity, like the child here on the left playing in this ball pool, while on the other side of the room, you see that on the second camera, an experimenter is making a drawing or writing a letter, and then accidentally drops a pen on the ground.
Liebe Mama, guck, das wird ein Brief. Huch. So sowas. Na sowas. Na sowas. Dann kann ich das Brief zu Ende schreiben. Deine Lia. Fertig.
So what we find is that kids continue to help even if they have to pay some opportunity costs, so they could have just spent time playing in the ball pool, and also some effort. So here they have to climb out of the ball pool, but we also have other studies where they have to kind of climb over a whole parkour of objects in order to go over there. And so the main important point is that kids are willing to help even if the costs are raised. There's some other work from my colleague Jessica Somerville from University of Toronto showing that kids, when they have to put effort into it, are slightly less likely to help, which is a good sign because it shows that they engage in some kind of cost-benefit analysis, right? But they're still willing to help. So they do view this as cost, but even though it's costly, it doesn't extinguish the behavior, it just makes it slightly less likely. Okay, so this is the kind of work that we've done with kids in Germany and in the US, but I also want to mention this is obviously an issue in the behavioral sciences, that there are these typical samples from populations of university towns, mostly in Europe and the US. But we find this phenomenon of helping behaviors emerging in toddlerhood wherever we go, or where other colleagues that replicate our use our paradigm have tested them. So this is a widespread phenomenon, and it's not just restricted to a particular population. I also want to mention, maybe you've encountered this before, that there's always the issue about whether scientific findings replicate. So this is something you want to do within your own lab, but ideally people across different universities and different labs do that. And when it comes to helping in toddlers, this is also a phenomenon that replicates over and over again in different labs. So with this in mind, I think we can challenge this idea that kids start out as pure egoists and only care about themselves, and it requires socialization, internalization of norms, modeling behaviors, and so forth to kind of reprogram a child from being purely selfishly motivated to also care about the needs of others. However, one issue with this claim, and basically any claim about child development, is that we find this emerging around 14 to 18 months of age. So you could always say, well, maybe they're just on fast track to internalize these kinds of behaviors. Maybe we care so much about raising altruistic offspring that we bombard them with that, and they learn this before they are toilet trained, right? So that seems maybe a little bit implausible, but you can always make the claim. And even if they did that at 9 months, you could still say, well, they had still 9 months to learn it, maybe. So this is one reason why it is important to not just look at children, but look at our close evolutionary relatives such as chimpanzees. Because the logic is that chimpanzees and bonobos and humans shared a last common ancestor that lived 5 to 7 million years ago. And we are clearly very different in certain regards, like bonobos and chimpanzees, for example, don't use language. And they don't have a society in which people teach them moral norms, at least in an explicit way. And there's also no evidence that chimpanzee mothers are modeling the right behavior or punish individuals if they are not doing it exactly the way they're supposed to, and so forth. So if this is, so this allows us with an amazing opportunity to, in some sense, travel back in time to what humans, or the last common ancestor of humans, bonobos, and chimpanzee, was like before institutions like human culture really have played a role. What we did then is we translated these paradigms about helping with toddlers to studies with chimpanzees. And here is one example. So this was the first study that we ran. So this is now a keeper in the Leipzig Zoo with a chimpanzee in the back over here. And she's basically enacting the same kind of thing like I did with the clothespin task, only that she's using a sponge to clean the table. And what we found, to our surprise, was that also chimpanzees would engage in these kinds of helping behaviors. And importantly, they would also do this without being rewarded, and also did not require a lot of nudging or anything, or threat of punishment or anything like that. So it was done exactly the way we did it with the kids. So this was surprising to us, but then we thought, well, one problem is that what we tested originally here were so-called nursery chimpanzees. So they were human-raised chimpanzees helping their surrogate mother. And so maybe this is restricted to this particular special relationship. But then we ran additional studies. This was done with my colleague Brian Hare and Alicia Miles, where they tested chimpanzees in an African sanctuary that have exposure to humans, but had never helped or had even interacted with our researchers. And even those chimpanzees were willing to help my colleague Brian Hare in these kinds of situations where he had an object out of reach and couldn't get it back without their help. And importantly, they did that whether they were rewarded or not. So similar to children, and what really drove their helping behavior was whether Brian wanted his stick back or not, and not whether he would give them food or not. Okay, so that made us more confident that maybe chimpanzees also have this tendency to help. But those were situations where they help humans. And so a lot of good things happen between humans and chimpanzees, at least in this kind of caring context. So maybe this is a limitation. So what we then thought is we really need to see whether chimps would help other chimps. The problem is that it's really hard to instruct a chimpanzee to accidentally drop a clothespin on the floor and pretend that you can't put it back. So what we did instead is we have this setup where there is a recipient in the room on the left, and we put a piece of food over there on the right, so the recipient is trying to open a sliding door. But the sliding door is blocked by the chain I've highlighted here in white, so the chimp can't open it. So the chimp relies on help from the subject over in another room in the back, because what they can do is release a peg that attaches the chain to the bars of the room of the subject over there in the back. Okay, so that's the setup. So let's see what they do. And what we found is that actually the chimpanzees would open or release the chain so that the chimp partner can open the door when they want to get food on that side, but they would not do this if a chimpanzee was actually ignoring that door and tried to go into another room where they could not help. So it's not that they release the chain because it's just fun to do, they do it when releasing the chain enables the recipient chimpanzee to get to their food, but not in a control condition in which it would not be helpful. So with this, we were more confident that these chimpanzees maybe are also helpful at a level not unlike that of human toddlers. And so there now are many studies showing this, that this is the case, and other colleagues have also done this with bonobos and shown that they too are willing to help in a situation where they open, for example, doors for others. So I think with this, we're in a better position to argue that it's not just due to socialization and modeling the right behavior and so forth, that at least these early, more basic forms of helping emerge, but that there maybe is a biological predisposition towards these kinds of helping behaviors that we share with our closest evolutionary relatives. And then factors like social learning, experience, and cultural norms can work with that, can nudge this even further in certain directions, but are not the actual origin of this. So for this reason, I would call this view the old view and do it in a normative way, the outdated view, because I think we have to have a new view of how these altruistic or cooperative behaviors more generally emerge in kids. And so the new view I want to propose is that we should think of these young kids as naive cooperators that already have several of these inclinations and abilities to help others out. And we find it also with sharing resources with others or collaborating in like a team-based task. And then over development, they turn into mature cooperators. And so these other factors can kind of cultivate this initial tendency, but again, they're not the actual origin of this. So what this arrow is, what I'm trying to illustrate with this arrow is that obviously we deal with very basic forms of cooperative behaviors, and a lot is developing. And one aspect of what is developing is that kids become able to help or act cooperatively in a wider range of contexts, right? So for example, they through language and reading and so forth, become able to help others we have never even encountered. We can just imagine how they might be feeling because we learn about them through other kinds of means, right? So this expands our ability to help others beyond what toddlers do, as one example. But another aspect of becoming more mature or a better cooperator is also to learn when not to help, when it's not a good idea to cooperate with others. And so I want to illustrate with the following example. So think about reciprocity. So it is a good idea for red here to help blue as long as blue helps back in the future, right? It would, however, be a bad life strategy for red to continue to help blue if there's never any kind of payback, right? If you always pay for the coffee of your friend and your friend never pays you back for coffee, this is just exploitative, right? So that would not be a good idea. And so there are a lot of models, evolutionary models, economic models, that show that some basic form of reciprocity gets a long way, so that if you engage in what often is called tit-for-tat reciprocity, you're able to have these enriching bouts of reciprocity, of cooperation, and if you just stop cooperating with someone who doesn't cooperate with you, then you also protect yourself from this kind of exploitation or free riding, okay? So the big question now is, when does that develop in kids? And the way we tested this is that we had this apparatus here, our zigzag ramp, where kids get resources like little golf balls or marbles that they can put into this funnel. It goes down and makes a jingle sound, and it's a lot of fun. But then it's gone, so they need more marbles. And so what we do is that we have the kid and a partner, so this is an experimenter playing like a life-size puppet, each one has their own zigzag ramp, and each one has their own marbles. But then we stage it such that the child runs out of marbles first, and the partner still has some left. And what we now manipulate is that the kids either interact with a cooperator, who in this situation shares some of their marbles with the child that has a scarcity problem, or they interact with a defector or a non-cooperator who never shares with them. So they just keep playing with theirs, even though the kid can't play herself or himself. And then what we do is reverse it. So on round 2, what happens is that now the partner runs out of marbles while the child still has marbles left. And the question is now whether the kids will share some of their marbles back. And what we found is that 2.5-year-olds are completely unaffected by the prior behavior. So they're as likely to share their marbles with someone who was cooperative towards them as they are towards someone who kind of screwed them over. right? So they're not yet differentiating between dealing with a cooperator or a defector. And it's not until 3.5 years of age that kids are then no longer willing to share with this defector who never had shared with them before. And so this is happening also over multiple rounds. So it's not a one-time experience. You realize, oh, this one is really a jerk. He never shares with me. But the younger kids just continue to share with them anyway. So this is why I'm saying that kids early on are more naive cooperators, right? So they're kind of overwhelmed maybe by the situation that someone needs help, and they do that, or someone runs out of marbles, so they share some of them. But they cannot really regulate it yet to shut it down when they're dealing with a defector. So what this initial study showed is that at least by 3.5 years of age, and remember, this is like 2 years later than when kids start to act in an altruistic way, they can look back on how they've been treated by a partner and then decide whether to cooperate or not with them. But there are also more complex situations, more complex reciprocity situations where you also have to think about the future. And so this is captured in what is called the trust game or the investment game that comes from behavioral economics, where it measures a very specific relationship between a truster or lender on one side and a trustee on the other side. And so the situation is that in these experiments, the lender has a certain endowment. In our case, these are coins that kids know they can exchange for prizes later, so the more coins, the better. And they can invest it, and then it increases, it triples, or it doesn't really matter, but the investment pays off. And the tricky thing is that it's now completely up to the trustee how much they would share, if anything, back with the lender, right? So this is something we care a lot about, right? When you go to investment or Charles Schwab or what have you, right? If you invested all the money and they never give you back a right share, you would not continue doing this. But the finding is then that at least with adults, it is the case that we are somewhat trusting and we are also trustworthy, that people are willing to give up some of their own money if it leads to some profit, trusting that the trustee is going to give back an adequate share. So this is a somewhat complicated thing, right? But with adults, you can tell them, oh, it's tripled or quadrupled or something like that. How do you do this with kids? So what we did is we set them in front of an apparatus that kind of does the math for them. So we have, in this case, a lender, the child in the role of the lender, and a partner on the other side. So this, again, is kind of a Muppet-like peer partner. And the kid in each of the test trials has to make the decision whether to put a given coin into their own bank, into the child's bank, and have it for sure. And then so over time, they can accumulate more coins, and then at the end, get a better prize. Or put it into the apparatus. And they learn the rule that there are these boards, and if the board has 4 coins on it, and only then, they can push it through the apparatus over to the partner, to the trustee. And then the partner gets to decide how many coins to put in their bank versus the child's bank, okay? So I show you now a video where my experimenter Annie is also maybe doing a better job explaining this than I do, to the child. And so you see first the instructions about the game, and then how the child interacts with a partner who is more or less trustworthy.
I give you a coin, and you can choose what to do with it. You can put the coin right into your bank to keep it, or you can put the coin into the tray to push it to the other side, because it can only be pushed to the other side when it's full. So you can choose what to do with the coin.
I want to put the coin in the tray.
And you can push it over to Sally. And Sally, you can choose what to do with the coins.
I can reach my bank, and I can reach your bank. I'll put all 4 coins in my bank. 1, 2,
to decide what to do with it, or I could put it in my maker and have that one for sure. I'll put it in my maker.
All right. So the issue is now that we have kids either interact with a trustworthy partner or an untrustworthy one like this one who keeps all the coins for themselves, and then see what kids do in subsequent trials. So the point is that they first encounter that one is trustworthy, shares half, or they encounter someone who is untrustworthy, keeps all for themselves. And now what we measure is what the kids do over trials. And what you see here for 6-year-olds is that when they're dealing with a trustworthy individual, they are very likely to invest the coin. When they're, however, dealing with an untrustworthy partner, they're very unlikely to share the coin with the person, with the partner. And you see that they also do this from trial 1. So they've already encountered that this one is an untrustworthy individual just based on the behavior, and then they're from trial 1 are less likely to invest the coin than kids who are dealing with a trustworthy partner. But when you look at younger kids at 4 years of age, what we see is that overall they're somewhat distinguishing. So when you look at it across trials, kids are more likely to share with a trustworthy than an untrustworthy individual. But you also see that they're not as good at differentiating between them in their behavior. So what you see is that they are over time becoming overall less trusting towards both individuals. So what this shows is that, or what we believe this shows, is that kids kind of get a bad feeling about the whole interaction of investing, but are not yet so targeted in really realizing when it's a good idea to invest and when it's not a good idea. And this is not a memory problem because we asked them afterwards, like who shared and who didn't, so they answered this correctly. It seems like they're not as good at translating this into their own behavior, knowing exactly when it pays off to be cooperative versus not. So then again, these two studies indicating that kids start out being more naive in when to cooperate and then learn over time when cooperation is maybe not such a good idea. So the last part I wanted to show you is what kids do when they learn that they're not just judging others for their cooperative behaviors, right? So in the reciprocity study, they kind of have to judge whether they're dealing with a cooperator or a defector and then make inferences about their own cooperative behavior. But the reverse, to what extent kids understand that others are judging them for their cooperative or uncooperative behavior and maybe navigate the social world in this way. And so what we're ending up with is the origins of corruption, basically. So what we set up for kids is that there is the game owner on the other end, an adult, and has this fun game where in the experimental condition it's introduced as a 2-player game. So this is like the first one is using, this is a maze, and is starting in the green zone, but then the other partner takes over and finishes the game. So they collaborate on this task. And so the top-down view, the schematic one, is that there is this maze, and in the experimental condition, the game owner says this is a 2-player game, so I'm going to choose either you, child, or the other one that's an adult to play the game with me. But before this is happening, the child and the competitor each individually decide what toy or to give to the game owner. And so we have it where there's always an attractive and an unattractive toy. So this is also shared. Everybody knows that they like the fancy googly eye sticker more than a Post-it note, right? And so the question now is whether the child chooses to give the fancier object away before the game owner chooses with whom to play the fun game. We also have it, importantly, where the competitor is always doing the opposite, right? So the kids don't know that. The competitor chooses later, but we make it so that there's never a tie. And so we do this over 4 trials. So this is also so there are 4 different kinds of games. So this is the fun thing about working in my lab. You can develop all these toys. And so this is what we find. So the first thing is that we have the experimental condition where it's a 2-player game, so where it really pays off, and the experimenter is actually corruptible. So they always choose the one who gives them the fancy toy over the one who gave the lame one. And so what we find is that 7-year-olds are very likely to share the fancy thing with the experimenter over the not so fancy thing in the experimental condition. But in the control condition, where it's introduced as a 1-player game, where the game owner says, later, I'm just going to play this game by myself and not choosing anyone, and they're less likely to give the fancy object away, right? So they're really strategic here. So they are basically bribing the game owner with the fancy toy only in the social situation and not when it would not lead to any kind of benefit for themselves. And then at 5 years of age, you find that the kids are also more likely to share the fancy object in the 2-player game experimental condition over the 1-player game condition. But as you can see here, it's not yet apparent from trial 1. So in trial 1, they need a bit more time to really learn that this is actually happening and that they can actually get something out of it. So it's the same pattern, but they catch on a little later than the older kids. And then at 3 years of age, nothing. So they are not they're not able to override this, keep the fancier object for themselves, and never get picked for the game. So the 3-year-olds are not yet as strategic in their sharing, not yet catching on that they can basically bribe their way into playing that game. Okay, so this then is the last piece of evidence I want to present for this idea that kids, for better or worse, turn from more naive to more mature cooperators, and that we should think about both the extent to which kids are able to broaden their cooperative abilities, but also the extent to which they're able to become more selective about the situations where cooperation is a good thing, and the situations or the people they're interacting with where it pays off to be cooperative versus not. But obviously, I want to conclude thanking all the helpful cooperators I have in my lab, which includes my collaborators that are co-authors on those papers, and all the amazing lab members, including research assistants and lab managers of the Social Minds Lab at the University of Michigan. Thank you.
So we've got time for some questions, if anyone's got. Okay. I can bring the mic.
Thank you, Professor. Would you comment on the role you see for the pleasure that one obtains in helping someone else?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so I think we see a lot of pleasure that comes out of helping, right? And so there's also some work by my colleague Robert Heppach from University of Oxford that shows that kids really get some kind of kick out of helping or feel relieved when this is happening. But the important thing is that this positive affect happens only if the helping is actually successful. So the point is that the helping act in itself is not rewarding, or they feel kind of bad if it doesn't pan out. It depends on the success, and the success in this case, it's really that the welfare of the other individual, right? So that's the finding with kids, that they are associated with positive feelings, but only as long as it's actually a successful act of helping, which then shows it's actually altruistic, what provides the pleasure, not just the act itself. Yeah?
Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. As I was watching the presentation, I was thinking about the children who are not altruistic.
Yeah.
And we have notions of sociopaths, we have notions of children who are unable to experience empathy or grow into adults, or political leaders who can't experience empathy. And I also think, like in the 1980s, there was a conversation, it probably was specious, but this idea that children of mothers who had been on drugs, maybe those children in some circumstances were missing sections of their brain that was impacting their ability to experience empathy. So I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on the non-altruistic children, not only in the experiments, but have you ever considered or studied them longitudinally to say, like, do they end up continuing to be non-altruists?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think the main point is that, I mean, what I demonstrated here is the capacity, and that kids have this ability or capacity to engage therein. What I did not address are these inter-individual differences that obviously exist for any kind of behavior you see. So the studies I showed you here are just not set up for this, but other people are looking into this also longitudinally, and also looking at the extent to which this is maybe driven maybe more by biological factors versus circumstantial factors, and how they interact. And so one important thing, however, I want to make is that if someone is not helping, it does not yet mean that they are psychopathic or lacking empathy, because there are so many other kinds of reasons why someone might not be helping, right? So this is also work with adults on from social psychology on the so-called bystander effect, that people are maybe altruistically inclined, but you also have to interpret the situation correctly, and you have to take on the responsibility to help, and might be misguided because everybody else is not helping, so why would I help, and so forth. So there are a lot of reasons why very good citizens might not act in a helpful way, and that does not lead to the conclusion that people are psychopathic and so forth, right? So, but yeah, there is a lot. I mean, this has actually dominated the field to look at more these antisocial behaviors, so that people look at the more positive side of things is kind of the innovation more. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, repeat. I'm concerned about when kids were less likely to do the altruistic behavior when they were paid, because in parenting, a lot of people pay their kids to do things that you would expect them to do. And therefore, I've always thought it's counterproductive, and I think maybe this proves that it may be counterproductive to pay kids to be cooperative.
Yeah, so I think this is a major thing, and how to deal with reward. So the one thing I would say is that if children are already motivated to do a certain thing, then it is really potentially a problem to provide some external reward. So this might be also grades, for example. So when grades are not about informing the kid about their performance, but are kind of the goal in itself, then it might undermine the willingness to learn something, or just engage in reading something just for the sake of reading. So there's a long tradition in this. Especially Mark Lepper from Stanford University started doing this in the 1980s, when he showed there is also this undermining effect that we show for helping, but he way back already showed this, that this is true for other kinds of phenomena in kids as well, and kind of behaviorists that were the dominant researchers at that time were really angry at this idea that rewards are bad. But this is a general phenomenon that applies to kids, applies to adults, that when there is this superfluous external reward for a behavior that then leads to this instrumentalization of the act itself to receive the rewards, and really undermines the kind of behavior. So I think the lesson I would say from this is to first see if people will do this because of the action, and maybe explain more why it might be important. And if all of this doesn't work, then maybe some bribing that might be good. But we then are in a territory where things are not quite as stable is the problem.
So the expected progression is from being naturally cooperative to being a mature cooperator. Is it possible for a society, for a culture at a particular time period, perhaps, to try to change that trajectory so that children grow up from being natural cooperators to being selfish competitors? And if, in fact, that's possible, and maybe you could point to examples if it is, what are the long-term or various consequences of, in fact, inverting what's natural into a counter disposition?
Yeah. Right. So I think, that it's true that the assumption in the model is that cooperation increases and becomes selective in the appropriate way, right? That we don't do it when we're being exploited. But that might depend on societal factors or what groups kids grow up in, where maybe it is also becoming maladaptive, right? And that certainly there are phases maybe in development where this becomes a bit more critical, and teenagers depend a lot on peers and want to be part of groups, and then it depends a lot on what kind of group they end up in, and where things can then become more negative. And like you said, maybe it's all about competition and not caring about others. But the overall thing is that this is, in the grand scheme of things, not a viable strategy for us, because we are social beings and we depend on each other more than any other animal, perhaps. Certainly among primates. And so this is something where the prediction is that those groups of individuals are not ultimately going to succeed.
Thank you. I'm interested to know what the history of altruism is in the world as far as it being studied, specifically in the field of psychology. If it is a globally accepted definition, like is there one definition, or does it kind of change with other cultures? And also if the idea of altruism has been, has shrunk or has grown, or in what the study of the idea or concept of altruism will be in the next few years.
I see, yeah. Altruism as a scientific concept is obviously, somewhat more novel, but the idea is that cooperative behaviors are universal, that in the sense of every human society has certain forms of cooperative behavior, and which kind then might depend on the circumstances. So for example, one important differentiation when you study altruism is whether it's altruistic behavior or altruistically motivated behavior, I should say, between family members or kin versus people who are genetic strangers, so they don't share any genes beyond what the average share is within the population, where then maybe other kinds of processes play a role, or that you have altruistically motivated behavior between strangers that don't encounter each other. So I think that the point is that when we observe different kinds of species, but also human groups, you see that you can explain the behaviors you see maybe more based on kin-based altruistic behaviors, where you see most of these cooperative behaviors just happening within the kin group, and it's not being extended to strangers. But then you have large-scale societies like ours, where you cannot just stay within your kin group. You also have to at least cooperate in some form, maybe not necessarily altruistically, but mutualistically with strangers outside of that circle. So I think this is how, at least in science, we try to deal with it, that we don't think of altruism as like one thing, but that it plays itself out in different ways depending on the constellation within societies or how also species function, right? Yeah, that's kind of the way we approach this.
Yeah, I want to go back to the 14 to 18-month-old experiment. And it occurred to me that a lot of the younger kids, those same children when they were younger, were probably in families where there was an interaction with a caregiver or caregivers who were being very altruistic to them.
Yeah.
And so how do you differentiate that learned behavior from whether it's a biological occurrence?
Right. So I think that the approach we are taking is that we say we look at these chimpanzees where obviously they are also experiencing nurturing behaviors by others, but they're not being taught how to do this. And importantly, we also try to show or test whether they engage in these kinds of helping behaviors in novel kinds of situations, right? So I didn't mention this for the chimpanzees, but this is also something where they had never had the opportunity to open doors for others in this way. So this is why we think that like a globally nurturing environment might be a necessary prerequisite for both human kids and chimpanzees to develop into cooperative beings, but it's not that there is some specific external learning that teaches them how to do this in this particular form.
Well, I got lots more questions myself, but I think we're probably out of time. And I think Dr. Warneken might be available just for a few minutes afterwards. And I hope you'll all thank him with me for coming. It was a great... Our next Cary lecture is not until March, I believe. March, oh, please help me. Sorry, don't know the date, but carylectureseries.org is where you go to look for it. And we'll hope to see you all there. Thank you.